Hi, Anna. I'm really excited to discuss your book, Famished.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, where are you based?
I'm in Huntington, West Virginia.
I'm Gen X, and I grew up evangelical. And so it's just fascinating for me to just see like millennial diet culture plus also millennial evangelicism
Yeah. All colliding in the same moment.
worse than Gen X.
I'm a huge fan of Sophie Gilbert's Girl and Girl, and she talks about how, like, in the 90s, the reaction to the AIDS crisis was like this huge fear of sex, and people swung one of two ways. Either it led to hookup culture, but then it also led to like, purity culture. And at the same time that we were having the war on obesity, like the Surgeon General declared this war. And so there's all this stuff going on politically that's influencing how we feel about bodies and appetites. And there are extreme reactions on both sides. And then
Yeah.
you're growing up in the middle of it. You're trying to figure out how to become a woman in the middle of that.
And then you are a woman and you're like, what?
What happened to me? I have a lot to unpack.
Yeah, I have to write this book to figure this out. I mean, it was fascinating. Like in the opening, you're in the ICU, you have a sick child,
Yeah.
and but what you're worried about is working up that pasta. And then you tie this pattern to your adolescence of hyper controlling your food intake and using exercise to cope. Can you just talk about that and how that need to control your body is also tied to purity culture?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had my son, I'm an adult. Like there's this idea about disordered eating that you'll outgrow it. Like it's a teenage girl thing. And it had been something that I felt like I'd recovered from. And then it just came roaring back in motherhood. Like so many different things that I think led to it. And it really, I feel like it hit this fever pitch when my son was in the ICU. They're talking about intubating him. And all I can think about is I'd eaten some pasta because I was supposed to run like a half marathon that day. And it was just, I was looking at my son, I was focused on him, but I couldn't grasp it. All I could think about was I have to figure out how to get this pasta out of me. And at the time, like I had enough self-awareness where I was like, this is not okay. What and I also knew I was like, this is a coping mechanism. This is like what you've done your whole life to distract yourself from anything that feels like out of control or scary or something you feel like at the time I felt like it was my fault that my son was sick because I put my son in daycare. I was a working mom, that guilt. And it just became clear to me there's so much bound up in this. And I want to be able to move past this, not just always being the thing that rears its head anytime my life takes a wrong turn. Yeah. And you asked about how that connects to purity culture. Like purity culture is just filled with hypervigilance. Like you are taught that women are taught that they have to control other people. Like you control men by how you dress. And moms in purity culture, there's this very clear script that if you do X, Y, and Z, your children will turn out well. So much of purity culture is teaching women to control other people with their behavior. And I think that was factoring into what I was experiencing too.
Mhm. Yeah, it was really fascinating to like read your book and just think about, yeah, because I definitely have this thing with exercise. And we were talking a little bit earlier about like the Dominican Republic. You know, I went to school in the Dominican Republic, and I will push my body to the point past exhaustion, or I used to. And it's just been this like gradual thing as I've been an adult, just to be like, okay, you have to take care of yourself. You can't push yourself. It's so hard to dissect these two things. Like, how much of this is purity culture? How much of this is diet culture? I was reading this and just thinking about just like how much purity culture does impact the culture at large. And actually, let me take that to the next question, which is in Famished, you're addressing women raised in evangelical culture. But how do you think this mindset impacts women in America?
I think that we see it in our lack of social safety nets for women. Like, I was thinking about this with paid family leave. I was talking to my mom about this too. She's shifted her politics and she would never let me call her like liberal, but like she shifted to the left a little bit on some things. And we were talking about paid family leave and how the reason we don't have it is because of I believe the reason that we don't have it yet is because of scripts about traditional womanhood and motherhood and like how you are subordinate to a man and you should rely on that person. And that is why we won't fund this thing that would help so many people. But it leaves people in such precarious state. And so even if you're not like in purity culture, you're being affected by it because policies are like things are not happening politically because of that belief system. Same thing with there's this idea in purity culture that if you are good, if you like dress modestly and you like don't hang out in the wrong spaces, if you obey these like good rules, you won't be taken advantage of in any way. And if something does happen to you, somehow you must have done something wrong. It's your fault. It's never like the perpetrator, it's the person, it's the victim. And I think that affects the larger culture too, in the way that we see certain people believed and other people not believed. Yeah. So even though it may seem like it's just happening in this insular space, like it's affecting all of our lives through policy. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. For example, wow, hold on, I have it. Okay, like you were talking about by keeping women small, by expecting women to remain submissive, the church ignores that there are dangers for women. And you illustrate this beautifully, like in that scene, like where you're a waitress and your manager is preying on you.
He was a coworker, so he wasn't.
Or coworker. Yeah. But like,
Yeah.
and I felt so having been a young person and been in similar situations, I felt so badly for you in that situation. But then I also I feel so badly for young women that, or just young people. You're given this message but we're not given the tools. Like growing up, what type of warnings as a young person would you have preferred?
Yeah. So that scene, I'm like trying to grow up, right? I'm trying to not be a little girl anymore. I'm trying to I'm testing what I can do. And if I'm making some big mistakes, in part because I have been sheltered. Like part of it, there's a lot. We all make mistakes. We can't keep people from making mistakes. But even as I was writing it, I was like, man, my like naivety is all over this page. But also, how was I supposed to know any better? I had just been told, I'd been taught that if I just follow all the rules, everything would work out. And I was starting to realize that doesn't take me anywhere interesting or exciting. It doesn't make room for my full humanity. But I didn't really have I hadn't seen it modeled. Like, here's how you grow up. Here's how you agency, but in a way that I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
As a person, not as an interviewer, like just as a person who grew up in that culture, it's just, you really are not given you're told that if something happens to you, it is your fault. And that's by design, I think. I know it's by design. Like it's by design because that way it shields perpetrators.
Yeah. And it also, and I'm saying this as someone who's still in the church, like it doesn't let women be human who give, as a Christian, you believe that people sin and then they can be forgiven. Like it doesn't give any access to forgiveness either. Or like forgiveness is it's really only for these people. The other people just have to play by the rules. So it really it limits your access to forgiveness, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
Famished interrogates the misogynistic mindset of the church, albeit gently. Throughout the book, like you give these instances of past of how the church, and again, and I'm not saying it's just the church, it's also society, but just definitely in the church, we're really seeing this happen, like where they want women to stay small, right? Like they want women to stay small by whether by encouraging them to tamp down their sex drives, making sure they don't lead men into sin, or staying physically small or physically quiet. And again, as someone who grew up in this culture, all of this is so familiar. How do you think women in the church will respond, slash women at large? What do you think this book
Offers.
trying to do with this book?
Yeah. So I have a launch team and I've had people like read it beforehand. And some people on the launch team grew up in a similar environment. And a lot of them said, I might not have the exact same story, but the major beat are the same for me. I think one thing I had to learn while writing the book was like, I had to learn how to advocate for myself and have some agency. And that didn't necessarily, at first, I thought that meant that I would have to reject everything I grew up with. And then I realized like I had the agency to like choose and discern. And like I could filter all of this through like my values. And but before I'd come to that point, I think I felt like I was just being forced to follow this script. It was very limiting and I was angry about it, but I couldn't really express my anger. And the only way I saw a way out was just to flee in the opposite direction. And I think that writing this, it helped me like think through my own agency, my ability to tolerate discomfort and like judgment. And I guess it helped me find my voice. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Because as a woman in the church, you're describing your reactions. So, how do you think, how would you hope that women in the church or women out of the church, women just millennials raised in this culture, like, how would you hope that, like, what type of conversations would you hope that this would spark?
Yeah. I think, sorry, let me think for just a moment.
Yeah.
I think that I'm interested in like fundamentalist thinking. Like I grew up in fundamentalism and it was extreme black and white thinking and like purity culture also led to purity of like we were supposed to have thought purity. We were all supposed to be the same. And I feel like I'm interrogating these limiting scripts that like require sameness. And I'm hoping that like we can talk about new ways forward for women, like that aren't just extreme, that involve some nuance that we can think about showing up imperfectly, or maybe even I had the hardest time like expressing myself for the longest time because I was always afraid that I would be wrong or I would change my mind. I always felt like there was like some judge looking at my opinions, waiting to like come down on me. And I feel like in writing this, I'm like realizing, oh, like I can show up imperfectly in the world and I can change my mind. And I don't have to live under this belief that there's always this ever watchful presence ready to like pounce on any wrong moves that I make. And I certainly learned that in the church. Like that was something that I got from the church, but I also see that like in the larger culture too. I think social media does a lot of that, a lot of like a very like panopticon, like we're monitoring people's beliefs and their purity of beliefs. And we don't give much forgiveness for people whenever they like stray or make a misstatement. And I'm interested in conversations like that, like how we can show up like in integrity with authenticity, but like also imperfectly with so that we can have more agency and actually like embrace creativity and y- that sort of thing.
I grew up hardcore fundamentalist, right? Like Christian nationalist, right? Obviously, really warped ideas of sex or whatever, but I never really connected like the I never understood like the whole penis thing party favors and purity culture and described your bachelorette party. I was like, oh, it makes so much sense. And then, but then it also, it's just, I've known people that I grew up with and like they've had struggles with, is it vaginismus? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, just like this like whole fear of sex. Can you just discuss like how for people outside of where we were raised, just like this like hyper focus on purity and how that is damaging
Yeah.
women and how it has lifelong impacts?
Yeah, like growing up, I remember hearing pastors talk about how like women were less visual creatures than men. And because of that, like we didn't want sex as much. Men really want it. They're a bunch of animals, but you all are closer to angelic beings. And so you all need to keep them in line. And so this was told as like both a compliment, like you have the moral high ground, but it's also like an insult because sex is power. And everyone, that's like, so people are aware of that in the room, but no one's really saying it. And so I remember growing up, like I went to a private Christian school. I was in church. I really didn't have friends until I got to college who weren't like Christian. And I just remember we were all saving ourselves for marriage. That was whether everyone was or not. That was what we all said. But we all also wanted to prove there was like this subtle like desire to prove that like we weren't prude, but we're like, we have this power too. And I didn't realize how weird evangelical purity culture bachelorette parties are until I invited some of my friends who weren't in that culture. Like in college, I met more people who had different backgrounds. And I think I invited them to my bachelorette party. But all the bachelorette parties I went to with girls who grew up in evangelical culture and said they were saving themselves until marriage, like the trend was like penis everything. Like we ordered a mold to bake a penis cake and we had penis confetti and pin the penis on the like guy without a shirt on. It was so stupid, but it was also like this, just like this assertion of saying, yeah, we've got something too, but we weren't going to break the rules and it wasn't going to get us in trouble. I think it's an interesting psychology. Yeah. And a lot of, so vaginismus is, it's sexual dysfunction. It's whenever you have involuntary contractions of the pelvic floor and it makes sex either it like penetrative sex, either like impossible or incredibly painful. And I struggled with it when I got married. I'd saved myself until marriage and I had no clue what was going on. I'd been taught nothing about my body. Like I just assumed that I was a total failure. And for years and years, like I went to a doctor at one point and they dismissed me. I just was like, oh, I guess this is just, it's really like I had no clue what was happening. And then finally I got some help and it got better, but it took an excruciatingly long time. And I did research on the condition and women in religious cultures suffer from this double the amount of like outside of those cultures. It's like 1 in 4 women. So it's a decent statistic, but you've been taught your whole life, like you can't have this is bad. Control yourself and control these other people. Like you're trying so hard. And then your body just like learns this is what we're supposed to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And how are you supposed to like, I mean, yes, if you've been told your whole life to be this way. And again, like with me, like I was able to, because my whole faith journey was, I went to a religious reform school because of that. At a certain point, like I was just like, forget this. And when I was, so nothing like that, but you still have these weird,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's just like, I'm looking at myself and yeah, you're just cut off from your body. Like you're literally cutting your body and your brain and everything, your soul. Yeah. But yeah, it's wild. I do fitness training now and yeah, pelvic floor issues. It's so huge with women. And then, yeah, and thinking about that with evangelical culture on top of that.
Yeah. You're praised for not acknowledging what your body needs. It's a scene like with the Protestant work ethic too. Like just this, the more compulsive you are, the more you like push past your physical limit, transcend your physical constraints. Like that is what is good. And like the body is bad, like having needs. Think like when I think about the political party that aligns itself with Christianity, like so many of their positions demonize people who have needs. Like I think that's rooted in, I don't think it's like something that people are consciously aware of, but I think it's rooted in this idea that no, like good people transcend their bodies. Like good people aren't tied, like good people work hard and good people like they they control themselves. Like I think that's all, it's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. You can take it. And especially, and I don't want to say other cultures don't have this, but just thinking about how that mindset and then America and then thinking about like enslavement. I mean, it's just wild. And then again, and then like thinking about that history that's not acknowledged and how that's showing up in our politics today. Yeah, it's really wild. I really enjoyed that part where you discussed again, like talking about not acknowledging the body, like that how fat phobia was racialized during Reconstruction. Can you discuss that more and more of your research?
Yeah. Thin bodies weren't always the ideal beauty type, and they really emerged right around Reconstruction. And it was a way for white Victorian women to distinguish themselves. It was a way of asserting whiteness. And that has become the standard, right? Like this childlike, frail woman, pubescent, prepubescent woman, that has become the standard. And yeah, it was in reaction to, it really arose like during Reconstruction. And be, I'm going to get this, I need to do, I need to like refresh myself on this research, but BMI was like Black bodies would have higher BMIs. I don't want to speak to, I need to refresh myself on this research, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was a way, it was a tool. I thought it was really interesting, just like noticing the way that it was a tool of patriarchy,
Yeah.
particularly like white supremacist patriarchy,
Yeah.
to make, and again, to make white women smaller too. But that also gave white women power. And I think about this all the time. Again, like just obviously, I have my own histories of disordered eating or disordered exercising. And I really do think about this a lot, like how it manifests, or then, yeah, like how you're praised when you're making yourself sick. A person as a white woman, if you become like you talked about that in there, and I've had that situation too. What was you read The Wisdom of Your Body? That was one person that you read. I have that book. I'm looking at it right now. And then
Mary McBride. Yeah.
yeah.
And then The Fear of the Black Body by Sabrina Strings.
Yeah, that was I haven't read that one, but I feel like that's been on my list before. That was really fascinating.
Unshrinking by Kate Mann. It's excellent. She's a philosopher and she like really unpacks fat phobia, where it came from, how it influences our policies. The anti-fat bias is the one bias grown rather than shrunk. So yeah.
It's wild to see how fat phobia is like in style again. So
When it changed with the political climate. Yeah, it's like at a time, I forget, I don't know who said this, but when women's rights shrink, women's bodies shrink. And I think that's interesting. The backlash to body positivity is like, what do they call it now? Like there's skinny talk, there's skinny society. Have you heard? I don't know. This is like what people are doing on TikTok, which is a little bit like Gen Z. I'm not really there. But yeah, there's a backlash to, and body positivity emerged during a time of more racial reckoning. Like, and so this is like the backlash to that too.
and obviously your book, but then also just like seeing the backlash with men too.
Yeah, with women's
Right. But then men too, like they're also, I'm thinking about Hegseth, obviously, like calling out girls the other day or last week, last year. Who knows? It all blends together. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we achieve some degree of freedom and then it makes people in power scared. And so they institute like discipline, obedience, and punishment. So like, it's like this constant war. We're afraid of everything's reactionary.
under fascist societies, the body is, yeah, people get smaller. You get smaller on how you express yourself. You get smaller, but you also you're just smaller, right? Like you're trying not to, yeah, how you express yourself, but also, yeah, we're seeing right now like this normalization with cosmetic surgery, et cetera. Yeah, the backlash to body positivity. And yeah, we're definitely seeing the reverse of that right now, which again, like it's very fascinating to see your book here, right?
Because I wrote it before this political.
Oh, I was telling my friend earlier, I was like, yeah, she wrote this book like what, 2 years ago?
Yeah, I would have turned in the final drafts. Yeah, almost 2 years ago. So it was like before, like we went back to right wing America, and I was writing it in the midst of the pandemic, which like was such an interesting time because we were having racial reckoning and like it seems like I don't know, but there was something about the pandemic that reminded me of my upbringing, like how rigid and small and rules based, like how we were all in our own like little like groups. I just remember because I wrote this, it almost felt like like not a fever dream because it took me several years to write it, but I wrote it furiously. It was like it like had a hold of me and I couldn't stop. And there was something about the the pandemic world that reminded me so much of my upbringing. And I think that was part of it. But yeah.
There's actually something you had a part where you talked about like how you almost felt, and I totally had this too, like the pandemic, it was almost like comfortable. Yeah. But then I have this other, but it almost felt comfortable. And I totally get that. But then that's also like indicative of, I'll send you there's some literature I could send you on that.
I mean, it's easier to have a bunch of rules and to keep your world small. Like and when I think about my upbringing too, it's not all bad. Like I have some very warm memories. And part of that is because I do think there was some good in my upbringing, not necessarily not the things we talked about right today, but I think there was some good. But I also think that there is we find sameness and like we find that safe and there's some comfort in that. But it also really hurts people. Like it's harder to live in a complicated world. It's harder to live with people who are different than us, but we need to. But do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I 100% know what you're saying. And I think that's the crux of growing up in fundamentalist culture. And that's the crux with the church is the world's not black and white. No. The world's very nuanced, and that kind of goes into the question I was going to close on, which was in this book, you do question a lot of fundamentalist tenets, right? Like when you're in this culture, it's really hyper focused on certain things as opposed to being hyper focused on the fact. And I remember this like when I was a little kid, like in church, like we would pray, raise money for the missionaries in Africa. I lived in Mississippi. There were people down the street. There were Black people down the street that needed help, needed support, right? And so people get really hyper focused on stuff. Or the big thing is like hyper focus in fundamentalist culture, like on sex trafficking. I thought that was a great scene. On abortion, or like this like unconditional support for Israel, or preaching against the socialist welfare state. When Jesus, like over 2000, the Bible was like, let's take care of the sick and the poor. So you're questioning a lot of things in fundamentalist culture. Are you afraid of the pushback?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. But I think I was thinking, I'm like, how was I able? And then I end the book and I'm still a Christian and I'm in the church. There's a lot that I think is beautiful in the church. There's a lot that I think is true, but I also like can't stay silent about the things that I think are really harming people and are like honestly, like, against what I believe Christianity has to say. I think that, yeah, I'm afraid of the pushback. I think that I was able to still write this book because I feel pretty secure in my relationships with the people who are closest to me. Like, my husband and I don't agree on every single thing, but he's very supportive and I feel secure in that relationship. And same thing with my parents. And not everyone has that. But I think that that has given me courage that I wouldn't necessarily have if I didn't have those things. But yeah, I'm definitely afraid of rejection or worse. I also hope that I find my people. And I also hope that I think a lot of people think these things and they don't feel like they have a space to say it. And I really do think that what I'm saying is not extreme or like the minority opinion, even in the church. I just don't know that like anyone is, no, people are saying it, but like I I feel like more people need to say these things. They need to like brush up against the stuff that is harmful.
So I phrase that wrong. I think all the things that you're saying, I feel like I've been so blocked this past year writing because I'm not a Christian. I have my own faith, right?
Yeah.
But I don't go to church or whatever. Like I have my own belief system. I really feel like I practice Christianity way more than a lot of these like capital C Christians are. Like the way I live my life. I have been so disgusted this past year. I've been so disgusted this past year. Like just horror. The fact that you have somebody arguing that empathy everything is wrong. They're just like, what Bible are you reading? And that's the thing. I will argue all day long, but these people are not reading I've read the Bible multiple times as a kid, not even like this past year, I've even pulled my Bible out. And I'm just so disgusted. How do you feel about the message that you're communicating right now? These conversations that you're opening up? Can you talk about why you feel like there's a need to have this conversation?
About women in the church.
But you brought up a lot of different things. I have a whole list right here.
Yeah.
You quoting where you're talking about being in church and just like hearing these things that I'm not going to go through it because I'd rather hear you.
I think that I'm I think that there have been some really despicable things that hurt people. Like I see how it's hurt me, but I see how it hurts all sorts of other people. I honestly don't think I could have stayed in the church if I hadn't have talked through these harmful things. I reached this tipping point. I can't just stay silent about this stuff. I felt like that was my only way forward. I think Christianity has a lot of beauty. I think that forgiveness of sins is like really beautiful. And I think that it has a lot to offer our culture. And I think I don't want to reject it, but so much that's done in the name of Christianity really hurts people and it's really ugly and it's really like anti-Christian. And I think that if we don't talk about that, it's destroying people. Yeah. I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I think the problem I've seen in the church, honestly, because I know a lot of people that I consider to be real Christians, but it's like the bullies are always the loudest, right?
Yeah.
They're always the loudest. And yeah, but because the bullies are the loudest, people of faith, they've not been calling out. And then now we're in this situation where you're told that if you that you hate America and you're a terrorist, if you're against these policies that directly harm people, particularly like you and I are women of privilege, white women of privilege, but we're impacted. But the people that Jesus called upon us to help the most,
Yeah.
they're being so harmed right now.
Yeah. I don't feel like you can, in good conscience, stay silent, which doesn't mean that I think you have to speak about you're on social media. People just get in their own camps. They start ignoring. I don't think that
Yeah.
you have to choose what you feel like you are specially called to address. Like what, I don't, do you know what I mean?
I would say the past 5 years, especially, have showed us like the limitations of social media for fostering change. But I think what we do need to be having is conversations with people,
Yeah.
particularly people of faith. So that's why, again, I'm really happy. I think you've done a great job with this book. And I really do hope it does spark some conversations with people. You're doing a lot, not just about food, sex, or womanhood, but just about a lot of things, I feel like. So,
Thank you. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm going to end the interview here. It was a pleasure to talk to you.